Connection light. Fine. I got into the
Is the projector on?
Oh, it's claims so, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. What's that? Oh, okay. There we go, but that's not the window I want to show.
While we wait on the projector to heat up, do we have any volunteers for minute taker? Anyone? Okay, awesome. Thank you. And I'll try to JavaScript. Oh, sure. Awesome. Thanks. Okay, so then in 5 minutes, when you finally manage to join the IETF Jabber room.
And we wish you good luck. All right.
All right, we're monkeying around with the projector as usual. Okay, so the usual note well, basically these are the conditions under which you participate in the IETF. The agenda for today, first thing is to take care of some administrivia, get a status update, a discussion of 6962 bis and obtaining proofs, because there's been a lot of discussion of that recently. Name redaction and privacy, also going to be a long discussion. Binaries logging and a log monitoring API, which that discussion may or may not happen. So you've got blue sheets out. Then the next order of business is saying thank you to Stephen. We've gotten him a plaque with log information for the IETF certificate. So thank you so much for everything you've done over the years.
Thank you. That's lovely. Thanks a lot.
Okay, status update. No changes to the charter. As always, we are behind schedule. We now have 42 open tickets, so thank you very much to Richard. 6962 bis, working group last call did not complete successfully, so this is why we're here. On name redaction, we've got several competing proposals that we'll be talking about today, and output from this will go to the mailing list. The threat analysis is stuck, and we don't have complete agreement about why we're stuck. But we really need to shake this loose over the next month or so and get this out. So we're going to take this to the mailing list as well. If anybody has strong feelings about it that they'd like to share here, that would be helpful as well.
Hi, Rich Sauls. If the editors say what they want, I volunteer to be co-author and put it in the text.
Yeah, that first part is the problem.
No, sorry. If the working group chairs say what they want.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we've got this situation with the editor that needs to be resolved as well.
You got the power.
Yeah, it's, if it were only that simple. Okay, so let's see, the CT Gossip is our first document that has completed working group last call and has been sent on for publication. So many thanks to Linus for that and for everybody who's reviewed it and done implementation. CT DNSSEC, we have no update on that. And is there interest in moving this forward? Yes? Okay. Well, as usual, the way to do that is to update drafts or submit new ones. CT binaries, there's new interest in picking this up. And Frank has a draft that he'll be talking about later. In addition, my understanding is that there's been some movement on this outside of the IETF. And DKG can probably speak to that, but we'd like an update on it when we're talking about that topic. So, and a reminder, this is a big deal in terms of moving the document along. 6962 bis needs to be correct, but it does not need to be complete. We can always publish additional documents providing explanation, additional features, and so on. Okay, so so with that, we are on to the status update from Aaron. Yes, I do. Actually, I'm not sure that I do. Which ones are these? Oops. That's not it. That's not it. No, I don't. You have them on your laptop?
Yeah.
Okay. That's why I don't have them. All right, as a reminder, the way to minimize the likelihood of this happening is to get slides to chairs before the day of the meeting.
Okay, so I'm going to give an update about 662 bis. When preparing this, I found slides from IETF 91 with updates about 662 bis. And I really hope that I won't be standing here again like in half a year and giving like another update. But I'm very confident that too. But I'm very confident that that I won't be, and I'll tell you why. So after work group last call, we got significant feedback from Mozilla, who took a very thorough look at the system design overall and tried to use to basically provide different perspective on how CT can be built or implemented such that it can give stronger guarantees to clients, and generally the bits in 662 bis that may be unfriendly to clients or implementers in general. The feedback falls roughly into one of these 4 categories, which Richard has hopefully filed in the issue tracker, and I've spent some time trashing them, almost all of them, with him. It doesn't, so the issues right now don't currently include the follow-up, but they will after the IETF meeting. And then what I'll do, I'll just go over them, present. So I'll say that for I think almost all the issues we have an agreement on sort of the suggested or recommended changes, which we will bring again to the work group for approval to make sure we have consensus on them. There are a few that we disagree on, which we'll also bring to the work group for the discussion. But mostly what I'm going to describe now is things that are the issues, what was the sort of the original intention behind each of those, and how do we propose to resolve that. So that on the editorial front, there was description of the log parameters, specifically the log metadata section that was, I think, relatively late in the process. The suggestion was to move that to the sort of closer to the beginning of the document where we describe an actual log operation. We have the extension types defined for SCTs and STHs. These are currently 2 separate extension types. The suggestion was to merge them to a single extension type. Because right now no extensions are defined, it seems sensible to me. We use the digitally signed notation to describe what the signatures in 692 bis are over. And the suggestion was to use the description from the TLS13 spec, but retain the encoding of the structure as is, including the signature and hash algorithms, even though this is metadata that the client should know about the log, because the client already knows the log's public key. Just to make it simpler to implement. You can just shell out to the underlying crypto library function for decoding that. Better explanations specifically about how to construct a leaf hash from the certificate and SCT, and then better description on how to validate an SCT. So the steps that are needed, what are like the data structure that needs to be reconstructed, and how it should be validated, which are again like sort of implied in the spec, but I think a better explanation would actually make it simpler to implement, because we have seen people both for 6962 and 662 bis somewhat struggling to do that correctly. Anything so far? More editorial stuff. So of the Miracle tree data formats, the data structures that are actually used, like stored in the tree, they're spread all over, should probably be consolidated and grouped into one section, or at least a few sections, one after the other. A great, I would say, like bike shedding opportunity is the notation for the Miracle tree section. How do you denote like a tree of a given size or an entry at this index? I think when Rob and I tried finding like standard notations, we couldn't find any. So if anybody has a suggestion, do let us know. There is a section about error codes. So some error codes are common, some error codes are specific to one API function call. And the suggestion there was to clarify exactly what are the common ones and say like there is no reuse of error codes beyond the common ones. So if an error code repeats in some but not all of the API of the HTTP calls, then for each of these calls that may return it, we'll specify there. And then the definition of incorporate, like what does that mean for a submission, the certificate to be incorporated?
I think that's Richard Barnes. I think that's a little different than what I thought we discussed yesterday. I was thinking that incorporate, an entry would be incorporated into a log when a signed tree head exists that covers that entry.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, I think we should just like clarify that. Yeah, I think.
So that's a little more than editorial. Is that semantically sound correct to folks in the room? I'm looking at Adam, seeing if he's nodding. I don't know. Because, well, no, I mean, it's meaningful, right? Because that's how you interpret the MMD, right? Right? So it's important to have like an actual definition for this.
Yes, I agree.
The MMD is a delta between two events. Like, what's the incorporation event? So, and like defining that as the timestamp of an STH or the issuance of an STH seem like an appropriate thing to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Ed Langley's nodding for the record.
Yeah, I think that's what I guess what triggered this issue in the first place. It's not entirely clear, but broadly speaking, I think a log entry can't really exist unless there's like, well, it can exist without having like an STH covering it, but clients see that it exists once an STH covering it is published. So we'll do that. Data structures. So there are a few data structures we've specified that I think we can like simplify. One was the suggestion to get rid of the SCT with proof data v2 data structure and name the trolls of the time very easily. Obviously, that was more useful when we thought that we'll support redaction either by allowing logging of intermediate certificates and then having one data structure that contains like the SCT, the proof, the STH for this intermediate embedded in there or embedded somewhere else would have made more sense. But that isn't like strictly necessary. It just means that clients will just have to sort of figure out which each inclusion proof and STH, where do they sort of belong to. Removal of the timestamp from the STHs. So this is actually, I think it's a good ticket because it sort of exposes like some underlying assumption. So you do need the timestamp in the STH to basically show that the log has upheld like the maximum merge delay, to show that indeed the certificate or submission was incorporated within a given time period. But if you want to use the STH as a proof of liveliness from the log, then it becomes more tricky because nothing, so like you can call get STH on a log and get an STH that's 8 hours old. What does that say about the log? I don't know. So I think, and I think this is an actual issue that came up, I think, when we monitored one of the recent, one log which incorporated some certificates and did so within the MMD, but we weren't able to observe the STH that shows they were incorporated until several hours later. So I think this is a discussion that should be brought up on the list because I don't have an answer here. Removal of these entry types. So these are data structures for stuff returned by the get entries call. And generally, I think it's very sensible to make sure that whatever is returned by the get entries call is the same format that was submitted in the add chain method.
Just so people are clear here, I want to remind folks that even though the name of these structs says entry, it's not actually the struct that is recorded as the entry in the log. There's a different TLS struct that also has entry in the name. So these are the things that are returned in the get entries as metadata about the actual entry.
Yeah, and this is a good point. I think as part of the editorial work, I'll go and clean it up and make sure that the data structure that has entry in the name is the thing that is in the log, is the log entry, and not something else. The next one was about indication of certificate per certificate in the entry and SCT. So right now we have the trans item, which can embed all of the other data structures in the document, and as part of that type in the trans item, there is an indication of whether the trans item contains an SCT for per certificate or an SCT for an X509 certificate. And the suggestion here was to move that indication into the SCT and not have two separate trans item types for these two SCTs, which I think is sensible. We'll just have to make sure that there are no implications beyond that, because, well, that sort of, I think logically means that when that's implemented, the SCT struct gets passed around rather than the trans item struct, so it's clear exactly what's being passed around, and yet the indication of whether it's a pre-certificate SCT or an X509 certificate SCT is still kept in the data structure and doesn't have to be passed along.
So one thing I think is nice about this proposed change is that it makes it a little cleaner to add different entry types in the future, because you can just increment, add an element to the entry type struct, or whatever you indicate the entry type in the SCT, as opposed to having a new trans item type.
Yes, yeah.
It's roughly the same number of octets, but it's semantically, it's a little bit cleaner in how they're arranged.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so comments related to the HTTP or the API in general. We had a few calls where we've added the STH as an output parameter in case the log doesn't know about the tree size that the client is querying about. So for example, if the client asks for an STH consistency proof between two tree sizes, but that particular front end of the log only knows about the smaller tree size because they didn't, that front end didn't get to see the latest one, then that front end could return a consistency proof between the STH the client requested and the STH, the latest STH it knows about, and the latest STH it knows about. So the client can sort of have a smaller delta to check consistency for. But it actually complicates the client implementation, and the benefit, I think, isn't entirely clear. So, because that's something that the client can do themselves, right? They don't get, they can just retry. So these were the suggestions to remove the STH from these calls. And I think Ben Laurie indicated that he made it more convincing about those. So I guess there will be a discussion on the list. Consolidation of the two separate endpoints, which these are just two separate HTTP calls right now, or HTTP methods. And there is already a different parameter that says if it's a pre-certificate or a certificate that's being submitted. So I think that's very sensible. The last one about best current practices 190, which I think, as far as I understand, says you should advertise the URIs in the directory. So there is one endpoint the client queries to get a directory that says which each service what's the right URI. And I think that it is not applicable for 662-bit because the client already has a decent amount of metadata about the log. Like the client has to know like the log's URL, the key, and a bunch of other parameters. So service discovery, I think, is of limited utility in that case.
Martin Thompson, I think I raised this originally. Now, I think you're interpreting the BCP 190 in a very pessimistic way. A potential way to interpret 190 is to say that you have configuration for each one of these endpoints that you've described. And that would work perfectly well. You could simply say that the configuration is required to identify all of the different URIs that are used. There's like 5 of them or something like that.
Yeah.
You could get away with that. And then you don't have to worry about BCP 190. The way the document is currently structured, it says /trans/v1 is, or v2, is a particular thing. And that says to people operating these servers that they have to put these resources in those locations. And that's massively inconvenient that could be massively inconvenient for some people. Obviously, it's not particularly inconvenient for those people who've already implemented it because they don't really care. But you're constraining the way that someone implements and deploys their service in a way that is unnecessary. And so if you simply say that the configuration that a client needs to know about a particular log encompasses now a small set of URIs, you completely avoid all of the problems with BCP 190, and you ideally get a better outcome as well.
So do I understand correctly that you suggest that like specifically having to ask like the resources to be put under CTV2 is part of the problem?
It's very much a problem.
Okay.
And so, and the resistance to doing a directory, which is what a number of other protocols do, is that extra level of indirection means that you have the extra latency involved with using that log. Now, I don't actually subscribe to that notion particularly well because caching and various other things, and you've got a lot of extra latency anyway. But if that is a concern, then you can simply take the other path that I suggested.
Okay.
Yeah, sort of taking my hat off. I'm not a fan of BCP 190 in general. I mean, this, this is not a web application. I'm not concerned about namespace collisions. I am concerned about latency, but on the other hand, I don't feel that strongly about it. I mean, it's not, you said it's massively inconvenient. I think it's a little, it might not, it's a little
We each have a
inconvenient.
subjective view of this one that's
Yeah.
different, and what BCP 190 says is don't say things about other people's spaces that you don't have to, and you don't have to in this case. Now, I've offered two solutions, one of which you push back on, fair. The other one I think would probably work out for
Yeah,
you.
as I said, I don't feel-
suggest you take that.
Yeah, I don't feel really strongly about this. I don't love it, but it's not that big a deal.
I think BCP 190 is not something to feel strong about.
okay,
People push back really hard on the general concept, but
Okay, we've got somebody remote. I'm going to hit the button and see if this works. Andrew?
Hi, Andrew Weir here. So speaking as a client implementer, I think that doing what Martin suggests would impose a lot of burden on us. And one of the reasons is that what if the log, say, changes the URLs that it uses? How does the log notify monitors, auditors, people participating in gossip that they need to use a different URL? So this creates a whole host of policy problems in the monitoring ecosystem, and it doesn't really seem like it's difficult for a server operator to have to use particular subpaths. I mean, they're all underneath a root URL, so I'd be in favor of just keeping things as they are right now.
yeah. So my response to that would be, if it hurts, don't do that. And I can't imagine someone who's deployed a public log that has numerous people depending on them is going to change where things can be accessed. Right? I think that would be just ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah. Okay. I think
I
we'll.
don't
Yeah.
even know why you would suggest that would happen.
Adam Langley, Google. So you're right, this is subjective and we can only kind of like weigh things, but my view is this is complexity for no reason.
Victor Vassell of Google. My opinion is that from practical standpoint, if there are no log implementers for requesting it, we should not do it. And from BCP190 ideological purity perspective, if we want to comply with it, we could just put .well known in front of CT URLs and move on with our lives.
Adam Langley, Google. We could also say in the Chrome policy that yes, you may configure it according to the RFC however you want, but if you want to be in Chrome, you will follow these paths.
I was going to also suggest that this is maybe something that should be shipped and iterate on. Speaking of, if it hurts, don't do it. Like we have some operational experience with CT now. Nobody has said it hurts. Maybe we can continue to believe it doesn't hurt, and then fix our VCP compliance later if they're to extend the protocol to add some discovery mechanism if it turns out to be necessary, if there's server pain later.
Oh, yes. Okay. So yeah, that one I'll definitely follow up on later. Okay, the architecture changes. I think these were like the meatiest suggestions. Some of the meatiest suggestions are. One of them was allowing separation for SCT and STH keys. So I mean now, like generally, like in theory, as far as I understand, like the protocol doesn't really require like using the same key, and you can definitely use different keys for verifying SCTs and then verifying STHs. We couldn't see like a clear benefit to doing that because like the way logs, like CT logs are implemented right now as distributed systems means the front-end jobs, the ones that actually need to sign like an issue SCTs, get moved around between data centers, so it's not like they are tied to a specific HSM. And there's like the signer sequencer jobs, the ones that actually generate and grow the tree, also move around between data centers, again, because we don't want like a single point of failure, so they're not tied to an HSM as well. So like there's no like a benefit to isolating one key but not the other. So it's something we can describe and say that it can be done, but probably in the security considerations say why it doesn't have to be done.
This feels a little bit like saying, your worry about sharing keys around isn't a big deal because everyone's sharing keys around already. I still feel like a little sketchy about baking that assumption into the protocol, but I'm okay like letting this be for now because it seems like, again, if we want to address this concern later, if we have some compromise incidents or something, we want to go back and fight that more. We could extend with some mechanism to delegate authority for some part of the system to separate key and fix it later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm okay with this.
Yeah. I mean, I think like maybe like a better way to put it would be to say like the keys for STTs and STHs share the same properties. I mean, I agree that you don't want them like these keys like distributed like too widely. And you want to like keep careful, keep track of how they're being used, but separating them is like maybe not beneficial because they sort of ultimately they share the same properties. Yeah. Okay, and then removing unnecessary restrictions on logs. So there are two restrictions that were mentioned in this ticket. One of them is about not imposing any conditions on retrieving or sharing data from logs, which is actually like a policy measure to make sure that data from logs can always be obtained. Not strictly necessary from a standard perspective. So the suggestion was to change that must to a should, such that implementations that under some circumstances want to prevent data from being downloaded can do that, but then the policy for the user agents for including these logs could say, no, you actually must allow like unrestricted access to the data that the log stores if you want to be included in the user agent iShip, which I think is sensible. The other one was about verifying that submitted cert has a valid signature chain to the accepted trust anchor, and that is in there mostly like for spam protection. So there are two reasons. One is spam protection, and the second one is that in 6962 bis, the SCT, the signature in the SCT covers the TBS certificate portion of the submission and the issuer key hash. So the client sort of, the implication is that the log verified the submission makes sense, and then like signed only the bits that are interesting in that perspective. It may still be okay to change that to a should, but but at the very least, like we should either explain like why it's there, and why it's like what are the reasons for keeping it there, and yeah, maybe change it to should. I'm not entirely sure about that one. Incorporating newer protocol mechanisms in the TLS client section. So this was about, so right now 6.6.2bis is very heavy on SCTs, right? It says like when you should validate SCTs, but actually we can ship embedded inclusion proofs. And the protocol should say that if you have like an embedded inclusion proof and an STH, then you might as well verify the whole thing. So I think this perspective should also be provided like throughout the document. Yeah? Two more issues around architecture. One of them is having the entire STH history of the log accessible to clients. So similar to get entries, where you can just get all the entries from the log, have get STHs, an API that allows you to get all the STHs from the log. And then if you add a sequence number to STHs, you can always like know which STHs sort of you need, right? And which STHs you can request. So that I think would simplify a lot such a method, and would still allow. So the importance of this is that if monitors in particular can download all of the entries using get entries, and keep in mind that each entry contains the timestamp of when it was incorporated, and then can download all of the STHs using get STHs, then each monitor can verify that each entry was incorporated within the MMD. So having a record of both is very useful for investigating. Actually, that was one thing that we were missing when investigating an incident with one of the city logs that was, I think, issued like STHs for entries with slightly different order, which means basically different trees, and we couldn't get like the historic STHs to know exactly sort of when that started. The last one about binding the set of artifacts the log is expected to produce. We didn't get around to triaging yet. Richard, do you want to quickly, to briefly describe the motivation? I don't think I'll get into it, but I think your perspective would be useful.
Yeah, it's too bad we didn't get to discuss this one because it's the meatiest one, I think. The idea here is that right now a log is expected to produce an inclusion proof, well, consistency proofs between any two signed tree heads, and inclusion proofs from any entry to any tree head. And the observation here is just that latter part introduces an unnecessary degree of freedom, which greatly expands the set of artifacts the log is expected to produce, which greatly reduces the cacheability of the system. Now that cacheability is important both for scalability reasons, but also for privacy reasons. Because if you look at things like the CT over DNS proposals that have been made, those are relying on cache hits for the privacy properties they're giving. So to the degree that we can reduce the variation in what a log is expected to produce and what clients are expected to query for, you get a better cache hit rate and a better privacy guarantee. So I think the upshot on the document for this is probably going to be, I would expect that what we would get to is to say that a log, instead of producing, being required to produce an inclusion proof from any entry to any tree head, would be required to produce an inclusion proof from an entry to a tree head of its choice, and then a consistency proof from the tree head of its choice to the tree head the client likes.
I just make sure I understand what you said. So your assumption is that at present the client has some tree head that it knows about, and it wants to maintain inclusion proof to that. And so so presently we require you to produce the log to produce inclusion proof to that tree head. And what you're saying instead is to produce a two-piece proof, one to a STH of its choice, and a second consistency proof to another SCT if the client requested. Correct? That seems reasonable to me.
I think there are basically two relying party models on the table, one in which you maintain one SCT and one in which you cache a bunch of SCTs, or I'm sorry, STHs. Basically try and cache the entire STH history of the log. In the latter model, all you care about is the inclusion proof and verifying that it's in your history. In the former model where you cache one STH, you care about getting consistency. And so I think So I mean, in this model, the client has some kind of skip list
STHs that it is confident about, and that's why it's asking for that.
Can people try and talk more into the mic, please? Because the remote participation's out there too.
Adam Langley. I'm just trying to confirm my understanding as well. This is sort of a compatible superset right now, because right now, like the server could say, here's an inclusion proof up to the but you're suggesting the client doesn't ask about any particular, no, it does. So the server can say, here's an inclusion proof up to the STH that you said, and therefore the STH consistency proof is null.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
But it's not required to.
It's not required to.
Right.
But any existing log can be trivially changed to implement this by using that method.
Yes, it's strictly a subset of one expensive.
Right.
Supersets, but yeah, anyway.
You're agreeing.
Yes. So Richard, I guess, I'm not sure if this is in the, here, I'll do this. I'm not sure if this is in the agenda at some point, but at one point we talked about the people who are producing this skip list would like to know which one the log would like. Is there some description? Is there some because that having this work well requires that the people disseminating the STHs to trust the clients, knowing which ones the log would prefer to produce. So is that somehow covered here?
Yeah, that's the idea of number 163 here, to say there is a list of kind of blessed STHs. So that doesn't address the question of which STH the log would like for a given certificate, for a given entry. That at least limits the space to say these are the tree heads you need to care about if you want to address the history of the log. So yeah, if you wanted to make it predictable which STH the log would like for a given certificate, that would need something else. That's not covered in this change set.
I'm just trying to get back to the model I think people have in their heads, which is, or some people have, which is that there's some mechanism for getting a set of blessed STHs, which you out of band believe are cool. And then you're going to go via the DNS mechanism and say, please feed me a proof up to one of those, right? And I'm just trying to make sure like that for that to happen efficiently, it would be nice if you could predict which one the log would have liked to give you that list for, and hence it would be cacheable.
Yeah. The obvious thing would be to add an additional requirement here that the STH you use in your inclusion proof is the proximal STH, the next one, the first one that covers the certificate in question. That seems reasonable to me, and probably the way I would implement it if I were going about this, but interested in what others think.
Yeah, so I think it's useful to describe this system, but it's one of the things I'm aiming for is to make sure that 6962-bis can be used to implement like city logs with the same like mindset or same approach that 6962 currently allows you, and enable that as well. So I think ideally the protocol will have like the knobs to allow you to do both, and then describe that particular approach, like how to select or how to bless STHs, right? And then the requirement for inclusion proofs up to one of these blessed STHs, and of the considerations about caching I think in its like documented builds on top of BIS.
Adam Langley, Google. So Eka, I don't think we need in the protocol to come up with like a way to distinguish some subset of tree heads. If the clients just ask for inclusion proofs to the closest tree head afterwards, then the server, just like with caching and so forth, can figure this out, and so it just should naturally work. Well, I'm assuming the client has some subset of heads that it's happy with, right? And it knows like the timestamp of the cert where it should be in, and so it says what's the next STH along, and ask the server like give me a path to that, and then just if all the clients do this just with caching, just works.
Well, so I'm not sure. So I guess let's assume the STHs are numbered by integers, and so what happens if so I guess what happens if Firefox decides to do to seal 1000 and Chrome decides to seal 1024, then we will disagree about those, and you won't get what you'd like, right?
Well, I think yes, that's correct. I think you'll get most of what you like. You might have different ones for different clients, but you'd have a handful of alternatives.
That might be okay. Well, I guess this may be, I think that the real problem is that what's motivating this from our perspective is the desire to eventually allow the servers to feed a complete inclusion proof to the clients. And for that, every client has to basically accept the same, has to check one at the same place. So I guess that's really the motivating case, which you may think is a super motivating case, but that's really the motivating case, and that just require agreement.
That's quite a substantial thing, isn't it? Having the servers send the proofs to the clients. I mean, I agree it's possible, but you're expecting all servers to do this?
No, I think it has to be coupled with the fetch mechanism. But I think that there are reasons to believe that the DNS mechanism may not provide exactly what you want and may not provide exactly the properties you want in various ways. And certainly there are performance impacts if you don't do that. A performance impact for the DNS mechanism.
But the DNS mechanism is out. It's not safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons this is a hairball discussion because this represents a substantial change in the goals of what we're trying to do here. And so it needs substantial discussion, but I am a little concerned about the time. And I want to make sure that we've laid sufficient groundwork to be able to take a smart discussion to the mailing list.
I think we've done that. I think what I might propose, I think we've got a separate issue here, an additional issue about making it predictable which STH you would address for a given entry. I would propose that Aran and I will talk it through. We'll make a PR and we'll have some discussion on the list.
Okay, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure, that's fine with me as well.
Okay, so I think that's almost the end. There were two issues on which we didn't have a consensus. I stopped short of putting like a photo of a bike in a shed here. The use of like log IDs should use OIDs or in32, and separately the OIDs specify that refer the identified extensions, which should they come from an IANA managed registry or are the ones that we currently have are okay. I'll just leave it at that. And yeah, I think generally like the way forward is like what we'd like to do is assuming again like the chairs are okay with us making more changes to this document.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at the point where we need to. You know, we want to produce something useful. So
yeah. Okay. So yeah. So under that assumption, we'll probably like write up like clarification suggestions for the things we think is a good idea and bring it up like each of them to the list to make sure that there is consensus, and then hash out like the few remaining disagreements. And as I said, like my suggestion is to have like a separate document that describes like the variant of CT that provides like stronger guarantees, describes exactly how you choose stages, what requirements from the servers are, and that sort of thing. But I guess we'll see about that one. Questions?
okay, thank you very much. I mean, I know that's been a tremendous amount of work over the past few weeks, and it's much appreciated. But there's more work, a tremendous amount of work yet to be done. Okay, is Saba here?
Yeah.
Okay, great, you're up. Right. Right, we're moving on to the privacy and redaction section. Saba's got another proposal. There we go. Okay.
Thanks. Is there a slide changing mechanism?
I am.
Oh, got it. All right. I might bother you a lot.
Okay, yeah, there are a lot of
All
slides, but we've got about 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, so I should book it. All right.
Yes.
So, hi guys, I'm Saba. I want to talk to you guys about some work I did with the Applied Crypto group at Stanford recently. And so what I'm going to talk about, you can read about in our paper. It's on the archive. I think I sent a link to it to the mailing list. But so the things that the paper includes are on the next slide. And we have some ideas for redaction, how we can get private subdomains in CT, and then some ideas about privacy preserving proofs that a log has excluded in SCT. And then we have some other discussions about privacy compromises and ideas about how CT and short-lived certificates can be made to work together. But I'm only going to focus on the first couple things highlighted on the next slide. Yeah, so if you want to read more about this or about the other things, you can look at the paper. So I'll jump right into the redaction idea. So yeah, so the problem of redaction, I think we're all familiar with. We don't want to have private domain names on the log. So ideally, any secret.facebook.com type domain wouldn't appear on the log. So on the next slide, we have an example of what we want. We want this to be hidden. Or I think we would content ourselves if on the next slide, we just redact the secret portion. So the idea that I'm going to talk about achieves this, where if you have a domain name with some redacted subdomain as a part of it, we can redact that part of the domain. And I think it's a very simple and effective idea that you're going to like. So the tool we're going to use is called a commitment. And the commitment is kind of the crypto equivalent of having a lockbox. So if you want a commitment in a lockbox, you put something inside, and then you lock it, and then you give it to somebody, and they can't see what's inside the box. But you also, since you put something in the box, you can't change it. So commitment is kind of a digital version of the same thing. So when you have like some number or some information that you commit to, and then you send it off to some other party, the other party is not able to see what it is that you've committed to. But later on, when you reveal the commitment, you have no option but to reveal what you originally committed to. So in this sense, the commitment has the hiding property that what's in a commitment is hidden from whoever looks at the commitment. But it also has a binding property that once you commit to something, you can't equivocate later and change your mind and say, no, I committed to something else. You're kind of forced to commit to what you, to reveal what you committed to. I said that quickly. Are there any questions about what a commitment is? No, great. So the way that we build these, yeah, you can just skip through all of those. Okay, maybe one back. The way that we build these is straightforward. It's just like you can do this with hashes. So the idea to build the commitment is if you have a message that you want to commit, then you take some randomness, that's like the commitment, the key equivalent, and then you hash the message concatenated with the randomness, and then the output is the commitment. This gets around the problem of like a dictionary attack on just hashing, because now to do a dictionary attack, you not only need to guess the input, but you need to guess all of the randomness as well. So the way that we're going to use this to do redaction is when a domain owner issues a request for a certificate to a CA, it's going to send all the information needed to make the certificate, but it's also going to send a version of the domain name with the secret components redacted by using a commitment, as well as the randomness that you need for the commitment. And then when the CA sends a message to the log, on the next slide, all it sends is the pre-certificate with the domain name that's the redacted version. So what we get on the log eventually, if you go to the next slide, is just the redacted version with the secret subdomain hidden, and then the domain owner's name listed publicly. And the SCT would get that same information, so it would just have the redacted domain in it. So finally, when you get to the certificate on the next slide, the certificate is going to include the actual domain name as well as the redacted SCT and the opening of the SCT. So when a client gets this certificate, all they need to do is on the next slide, they're going to, when they request the page, then they get the certificate back on the next slide. And sorry, I'm doing this to you.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
And then on the next slide, they just need to verify that the commitment component of the SCT actually corresponds to the thing that the certificate is purportedly for. So if you have some commitment to secret.facebook.com, you need to make sure that the SCT included is actually for secret.facebook.com and not for some other site that's someone's trying to pass off as being for secret.facebook.com. So on the next slide, we briefly discussed the security of this. So there's two questions that come to mind for security. One is, how is a monitor still going to do its job if we have redaction? I think this is a kind of a general redaction question. But the idea here would be that if you know how many entries there are from like Facebook, you can look and see, hey, there's, we thought there would be 16 entries from Facebook. There's 17 entries from Facebook. Something is clearly wrong here. Or, I mean, if you have knowledge of the individual SCTs, you could, if you know the randomness, you can kind of check them one by one as well. Also, another natural question is, why can't a malicious site or CA reuse an SCT that's already on the log? And this is prevented by the binding property of the commitment. Yeah.
So this seems to make the life a lot worse for the site operator, because when he discovers a problem, but he discovers effectively a parity problem, now he has trouble investigating it, right?
When there's a parity problem,
so
yes.
he discovered. So the site operator, I have 50,000 certificates for my site, which is not like crazy pants, right?
Mhm.
And now I discover that there are 50,001 certificates. And now what do? Because my problem is that I don't know whether there's some section of my organization which like is issuing certificates unbeknownst to me, which is actually quite likely, or whether like this is an attack. So how do I resolve that problem?
I see. So I guess one way to do it is if you're concerned about segments of the organization, we could have more granularity in terms of like what levels of subdomain is secret and what level is not. But that's not a complete solution either.
Right. So what I have basically is foo.mozilla.org, bar.mozilla.org, baz.mozilla.org, and so the situation I have, right, is I've got like basically like most of the organization is like doing what it's supposed to do, and then I got some part of the organization which is getting certificates for their subdomains, and I was unaware of that fact.
Right. So
I don't think it's about parity or even about count, right? If you're actually doing a proper monitoring, you need to know the certificates your organization has actually issued, all of them. And you need to look at the stuff that's in the logs and compare what's in the logs with all of the certs that
No. Because I think I know all of them, and then when I see a new one, I see a new one, and it's surprising. And then what I do is I go on and try to investigate it, and I say, oh, this is this is dev.mozilla.org, right? And I know who I call, and I say, did you really issue this, or is this an attack? But in this case, I say this is a commitment on screen. So was my recourse, I call the CA and ask them to decommit?
The CA doesn't know, does it?
So if we go back a couple of slides, the key for the commitment is going to be held by the site as well as by the CA, so that it can be put in the certificate if you want. So I guess you could call the CA and decommit, but also like Facebook should have the decommitment.
But again, the thing you're misunderstanding is I have mutually uncooperative sub-organizations issuing certificates in my name. Which actually totally happens. So like, it's not happening at all. So I don't know my problem is I have, 10 divisions, and I don't know which division misissued or actually properly issued. And so how do I go ask them, is this a real certificate or not?
So Eckhart, how do you do this when they're not redacted and you see the certificate you don't know about?
Because we look at the domain name, and the domain name generally is something we can kind of figure out. Like it says, Project X blah, and I go and I say, who the hell is Project X blah? And I say, oh, it's that guy, right? Or it's not, and eventually I say like, well, then it must be misissued, right? So it's really kind of very painful not to have any idea who it is. So I mean, I'm not saying this is a non-starter, but I'm saying it's like not awesome.
Is it? Oh.
So I mean, if that's your organizational policy and you don't plan on doing redactions, then you could just say if it's redacted, right? This is an organizational choice, right? Are we willing to open ourselves up internally to this thing, or are we going to say no one should be issuing redacted certs within our organization because we don't have the capacity to track people down?
I'm not saying anything. I'm trying to understand how that thing works.
Well, no, but what I'm saying is, as an organization, you have an opportunity. You can say no one in our organization should issue redacted certs, and if you do issue certs with redacted SCTs, then something's wrong. You're out of company policy anyway.
And then what do I
do? Then you revoke those certs. Right? I mean, then you say
you never found out it was this issue.
I know, but it's a issue, which means I have a CA recourse problem, and so I mean, I guess look, I'm sorry. I feel like this is like I was just asking a simple question. I feel like this may have gotten out of hand. I think I understand the properties of the system. I'm not saying please continue.
Yeah, this seems actually like a feature, not a bug, right?
Who are you?
Rick Salt. It puts apparently if you can't manage a PKI like Mozilla, it puts a high cost of being able to use redaction on the people who want to use redaction, as opposed to diffusing it across the whole web PKI. But just a comment, yeah, I think it's kind of neat though.
Nope. Sorry, just wanted to add that I think the problem raised, I think exists in all of the redaction schemes I know of.
Yeah, thanks, man. I think this is kind of a general thing about redaction, but.
So I'm going to JavaScribe. So Victor Duchovny says you could require a contact address in every legitimate certificate.
No, that's also privacy leaky. Yeah.
If we're making stuff up on the fly, like we can say you must have a DNS entry in your ETLD+1 with a public key in and blah blah blah. But I mean, this probably isn't the forum for making stuff up on the fly.
I'm going to start a new topic. How do you tell that you need to verify this thing?
That you need to verify the
That you need that it is in the form that you describe. How would I tell based on?
Oh, so how do you know that it's like this is a commitment versus this is
That's just a
actually
name,
like
yeah.
some weird string.facebook.com?
Right.
I guess there would have to be some flag or some indication in the certificate that this is a commitment and not.
Ben Schwartz, Jigsaw. So what happens if the unredacted certificate leaks? And in particular, does that create a problem for a CA who's committed to, who's publicly stated that they will put all of their certificates into certificate transparency? Or is there how do we combine this idea that all certificates generated go into the CT logs with this idea that now actually only, in this case, half of them go into the CT logs?
So I'm not sure if I fully understood your question, but I guess the idea is if a certificate that has an SCT that's committed is leaked publicly, then clearly everybody in the world knows that this redacted SCT is connected with the certificate because they've shown up together. Yeah, and I think this is a problem with redaction also in general. Like if you get this SCT from the site and it's redacted, then you can always go public with it.
Sure. Let me try a different version of this. If I'm a customer of a CA and that CA has publicly committed to log all the certificates that it generates into the CT logs, how do I tell it, please generate this certificate for me, but don't put it into the logs? And in violation of your public commitment, I promise that I'm also going to register a commitment to this name, and you will be able to log that and thus not violate your commitment.
So you're saying that the commitment gets put on the log.
So the order that you had them in here, I'm not sure, but if I'm a customer of a CA,
yeah.
It seems to me there's a point at which I have to ask the CA to sign a certificate and not put that certificate into a certificate transparency log. If they've issued a press release that says I'm going to put every certificate into the log, then they're violating. Okay, so why is that not?
One thing, if possible, I'd like to move the discussions of redaction more generally to the redaction more generally section. This is providing background on one proposal.
Yeah, so I think that's all I've got on redaction. Do I have more slides on this? Yeah, that's everything I have on redaction. I was going to ask if there's any questions, but I guess we jumped ahead and we took care of that. So the next thing I want to talk about is about proofs of log exclusion. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I'd like to do redact. Is Clint here?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So maybe I come back later.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so we obviously already have a lot of discussion topics. I'm going to go through this as quickly as possible so we can get to the good stuff. This is basically just supposed to provide a background to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page as far as where redaction's at, where it's come from. So we have kind of two general reasons for redaction that have been discussed in the past, going back from like 2014. One is for privacy, one is for secrecy. The topics we've just discussed today have been focused around secrecy. So privacy is something that has to do with kind of removing data from a log. So it's already been entered into the log. All of a sudden it contains, PII, and you get a court order to remove it. Do we need to solve that technologically? Do we need to have something that can actually remove an entry from the log or replace an entry in a log while still allowing that log to continue to be used? And I think where it's kind of left off, the discussion is left off, is that this probably isn't something that we need to solve in the working group. If an ecosystem, if an implementer of CT can't rotate logs or can't be agile in their trusted logs, then there's kind of bigger problems. The only concern I think that we might want to address or discuss is that if a a privacy concern was raised about a specific entry, or that certificate was had an entry in all of the logs that an ecosystem used, then that could be potentially catastrophic to the specific ecosystem. But again, that's really I think a problem for the policy or for the implementer to solve. So that's kind of privacy. The second one is secrecy. This is pre-certificate. So this is just never entering some part of the actual certificate into the CT log. And this is, I think there's general consensus this is at least worth discussing or continuing to figure out. All of the current drafts, as well as the discussions. So the BIS 16 was, and the current version even include this, Rob Stradling's draft. He has out the proposal that Peter put out on the list, and then Saba's as well, all kind of center around this idea of just preventing some data, figuring out a way to have some data not included in the cert. Go to the next slide. So Peter Bowen put on the list, I think, a set of base assumptions. So we kind of want to have what are the goals of redaction? Again, this is for pre-certificate redaction. I think it's a good set of goals. I've updated it based on the discussion in the email list, but if we can kind of all agree that this is what we want redaction to do, and these are like the things it needs to be able to do to be successful, then I think we can have a good discussion. If there are things that we disagree with here, then I don't know. Hopefully there's consensus since this discussion already took place on the list. I'm working off of that assumption as well. So we can go to the next slide. So redaction was added in April 2014. It was two forms of redaction: domain name redaction. So like what Saba presented, we're not including secret.example.com. At that time, it was basically just replace any secret with private, with the word private. So and then the other one was name constrained intermediate CA. So if the intermediate CA is constrained to specific domains, then anything issued by that CA on those domains doesn't need to be included in the log itself. And we've had various updates occurred over the next 2 years, and BIS 16 was kind of the next stage where this really came up again as a topic last year. And there's a bunch of discussion at that time. It still contained the same two basic versions or mechanisms for redaction: domain labels and name constrained intermediate CAs. This added the idea of an extension, like what we discussed with Saba. We need to have some kind of mechanism identifying that you need to do a verification of the SCT versus certificate. So it added a redacted labels extension, but it was pretty complex for a TLS client to actually go through that verification process. Required decoding and re-encoding a fair bit. And it wasn't unique. So you couldn't, if you had a pre-certificate, it could theoretically match to multiple full certificates. This version, as far as I understand, is what's currently implemented by Symantec in some cases. So they're logging redacted certs right now that use the mechanism described in BIS 16. So you can go to the next slide. So this is, as I understand it, the current 3 proposals or mechanisms that are that we want to discuss today. One is BIS 17 and Stradling's draft. It updates the redaction mechanisms a fair bit. It uses it still includes the name constrained CA and the domain labels. It uses a redacted subject alt name extension. So all of these kind of have some common threads with different names for them. It's quite a bit better for a TLS client to implement, a lot less complex. I don't know of any log operators that are actually implementing this. The next one is Sabas, so I won't go into that one, but Sabas is another version, and there's obviously some similarities between that one and Stradling's draft. And then the next one is the one that Peter Bowen and Tara Wheeler posted to the list just the other day. This adds a pre-certificate transformation extension. It adds support for the first time for IP addresses in addition to DNS names. It's in its current version, it is pretty complex, similar to BIS 16, but Peter's working on updating that and making that more client friendly. So I see Rob and Peter are on the call remotely, so I don't know if we want to have them give some overview of where they are at with their proposals or their ideas, but we want to go back to the discussion that we were having with Saba and kind of open up, discuss redaction at large and how we want it to look, how we want it to function, and hopefully decide on the way forward here.
Yeah, we're a little short on time, actually. So I'm not sure about additional presentations on this topic. I think that if there are some immediate questions, this would be a good time to do it. But I do want to get to the next presentation within what time is it? Yeah, within 4 minutes. Yeah.
So should we just take this to the list based on the discussions that have been brought up very recently on Saba's proposal and Peter's proposal? We can just continue those on the list and move from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be discussed on the list anyway. So if somebody has questions that could go to the list, take them to the list. If there's something that would benefit from face-to-face, let's do it now.
This is DKG. I just wanted to clarify the terminology you framed this discussion in, where you have privacy versus secrecy. The privacy really seems to be more about toxic data and might be something that is relevant after something has already been entered into the log in a non-redacted form. And I don't think any of these address the toxic data question. Is that right?
So yeah, the question is whether we need to solve that technologically. For instance, if I'm an implementer, I can just say, okay, you run a log and toxic data was submitted. We're going to no longer trust that log. Now you can do whatever you want with it, blow it away, get rid of it. So do we need to have a technological solution to removing toxic data?
Right. Like it was one way you could do this is just run multiple experiments. Have everybody write this up as experimental drafts, gather implementation and deployment experience, and sort of go from there, right?
Well, yes, but there are people doing redaction now, Symantec, and it is something that is kind of core to what we're doing. So I'm not sure that we want to punt on this too much.
Wes Hardiker, USC. So, the problem that I see with this is you're taking a fairly simple solution that was designed to make sure that everything is always published, and then you're trying to figure out ways how to not publish stuff in it or to publish stuff that's secret. And you're going to take this simple system and make it, like incredibly complex, trying to deal with redaction and trying to deal with, privacy. And you're going to get into issues of, well, how do we solve offline dictionary attacks to these types of things? You're going to get into issues of, well, okay, but you're right. I did not, produce this entry in my log, or I produced this private entry in my log because example.com told me to, even though they really didn't. So then you get into he said, he said kind of comments. And the reality is that, the notion of certificate transparency was to be open and honest. And we're now inserting ways that's going to break those conversations in the future.
I think that's definitely a valid concern. Going back to some of the assumptions that Peter set out, we do have to acknowledge that things like DNS split horizon and private name server delegation exist. So there's, basically there's public certs used privately. But is that something that we, would need to address with CT?
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And of course, there will be much more discussion on the mailing list. Next up is a discussion of logging binaries. I don't think we've got time.
Hello, everyone. It's Frank Xia from Huawei. I think this is off topic, but maybe I'll keep silent for some time. And now we try to bring it again. And the whole point is that we want to be based on the CT Pro mechanism to do the software distribution, monitoring, and auditoring. So it's the key point is how to extend the current CT protocol to do this work. Okay, so we want to use this extension protocol to log in the software binary codes or its digest. So because sometimes the software provider do not want to there are some license restriction, or they want to make certain their log content on the log tree. So that's why maybe sometimes we use its digest. So logging these informations can bring some benefits. I think these benefits are very similar to the CT benefits. So it can firstly, it can enable anyone to monitoring and audit the software provider activity. So if they do the misdistribution, if some illegal software provider to distribute some software, okay, and we can also find the backdoor of the distributed software, and also we can because there are a lot of logs there, and we can compare the log for the same software in different logs. So maybe it can also help us to find some problems. Okay, it's very similar to the CT for the certificate monitoring. Okay, next page. And so how to do these things? So just like what I said, we just simply extend current CT logging mechanism. So what do we extend? Firstly, we need to log the software binary codes or its digest into this Merkle tree. Okay, and instead of the TLS server certificate. And also when we log it, and the signed time step is about the binary code. Okay, and so based on this idea, we also need to do some extension to the current some data structure of the Merkle tree of the log system, such as we need to define a new type trans item, a new Merkle tree list, and a new SBT definition. And also we need to extend some current certificate transparency message process of the input-output parameters. But the other things are totally the same with the CT protocol. Another page. Okay, actually in the following pages, I listed all the changes or all the extensions to current CT protocol. Firstly, it's about the new binary transparency log entry. Actually, the main point is that here we have the signed software attributes in this entry. It's a binary code, or it's digest, and it's kept in the CMS format. This object includes the software and its signature and its use and other information that can be described as the software. Okay, next page. And I think in the first presentation about the base protocol, there will be some changes updated. So here I can that means that my draft will follow the base drafts update, such as maybe the new type of being SBT with proof can be removed, right? Yeah, and but because my current draft is based on the older version of draft, yeah. So that's some new enumeration type for the structure of the log. Okay, and next page. And also, this is about the new Merkle tree leaves. The main difference is that here this is not the certificate information. This is about the software binary code information, and it's a data structure of we defined in the previous page about the binary code entry, right? Okay, And next page. And this is about the sign, the timestamp, and we have do the digital sign on the items. Okay. And these are the two new updated messages. One is how we add a new binary code entry into the certificate log. So there are some new inputs and outputs, and I do not want to go into too much details. And about another one is how to get the log entries from the tree, and also there are some extension to them. So if you are interested, please to read the document. Thank you. And I think that's all. And yeah, I think I can follow the latest update of the basic draft and do this work. Yeah.
Google. So one question is about preventing log spam, right? So in certificate transparency, it's very easy to only accept submissions that make sense because you just check signature chain. Here you also allow, if I understand correctly, logging of just the hashes of the software rather than like the full binary. So how do you make sure that you only like get valuable submission and not just like random hashes?
Yes, good point. I think. I think this is a problem. We currently just very straightforwardly to extend the CT protocol, and we have the software hash, we have the ensue, and the software provider's public key. Use this information to bind the software provider and the log. But maybe your provides a new problem. Yeah. In this, yeah.
So I'm really glad to see this is work in this space. I think it's binary transparency.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm Richard Barnes. Recently of Mozilla. Yeah, I'm glad this is going. And one of the things I worked on when I was, one of the last things I worked on Mozilla a few weeks ago was getting a basic binary transparency scheme set up there. So you might take a look at that as an antecedent because that scheme is just hacked on top of certificate transparency. So instead of putting the binaries directly into the log, that scheme takes a digest of the binaries you want to log, encodes that into a domain name. It gets a cert with that domain name and logs that to CT.
Okay.
So
yeah, it's another way. Yeah.
You can hack this on top of CT. It's a little sketchy, I admit, but it kind of gets the job done.
Can I ask you a question about it? Why did you choose to do that rather than using like Trillion or something, you know, doing the general transparency stuff that coming out of Google? Okay, I guess that answers why, yeah.
Because there's running code.
Yeah.
We could just do it. So I think it is worth thinking through how you could do it more directly without these extra layers. But yeah, so just want to point out there's some.
Yeah, we can discuss. Maybe we can.
I think the plan that Mozilla has talked about is to start publishing this way and start verifying in the Firefox updater that things have been logged in this way. So there will hopefully be some running code in a non-zero amount of time, a non-infinite amount of time.
Would Mozilla be interested in something that's coming out of the standards space?
So I am no longer representing Mozilla, so I'll leave that to my colleagues.
She's cool.
So this is DKG. So I'm happy that this work is going on. There's also work going on outside of the IETF on binary transparency. There's been some discussions that are not moving very fast, but between different free software distributions in particular. So Debian and FreeBSD and PyPy and the NPM repositories have talked about this. And in those discussions, we've reached, I think, a different set of conclusions than the direction that you're heading with this draft. So I want to follow up with you more on that off list. But in particular, there's a question about the log spam issue and ensuring the identity and version of the software is a critical component of the logs, because that's what you need in order to be able to do the review. And it's not clear to me that we have that clearly enough in the binary transparency.
Yes.
Yeah, Martin Thompson, Mozilla, but I don't actually have an answer to the question. Yes, we would look on it favorably, and Eka will have an answer. question I got up to ask was, you've got the equivalent of an SCT here. Is that really necessary? There's a lot of machinery associated with that, and it's possible. And I don't know how to deliver one of those with the binary necessarily in a way that would be consumed by someone actually executing it. So I suspect that what you want to do is drop that from any specification and simply wait until you get the next STA feature. You know, I can wait that long if I'm shipping software.
Adam Langley, Google. Similar to DKG, I wanted to emphasize that the point of binary transparency, as I understand it, is to make sure that you aren't given some magical backdoored single special purpose binary. But if all the log contains is like the SHA hash of some lump of machine code, that's not really useful. It needs to be tied into things like verifiable builds and like source trees, or it needs to be like the whole binary and you need to have not too many versions. Richard is shaking his head at me. Maybe I misunderstand things.
The latter means the version.
So I think it's absolutely the case that, sorry, Eric was Squirrel. So first of all, I think it's the case that in an ideal world, this is tied into verifiable builds. Verifiable builds ensure that generally this thing you're distributing matches the source code people can examine. The purpose and the reason we did this at Mozilla for binary transparency at all is if we're willing to commit that we're going to ship this many releases, and we tie the binaries to those releases, then you can verify that when you got 51.1, that's the same 51.1 everyone else got, which is better than nothing, but not as good as what you're saying.
Yes. Yes. So that's good too. But something in that vein I think is necessary.
Yeah.
Eric Squirrel, first I'll talk with my Mozilla hat on and then take my Mozilla hat off and my AD hat on, but I only have one hat. So, so from Mozilla's perspective, the reason why we did the hack that Richard was describing is because it works today. And so we're able to take advantage of an existing log infrastructure, and therefore we were able to have that value today. So thank you to Google and company for providing that. So we would be interested in, if there were someone willing to run, or some set of people willing to run a log, binary transparency log that we could then use, we would be interested in using that. I don't think we wouldn't be interested in using implementing a new protocol that was not tied to anybody operating a log, since that's of no value to anybody, right? So in that respect, so my question would be, is in fact there going to be enough people willing to run a binary transparency log to make that worth to something that will actually occur? Now with the hat off, this seems to be, well, I'm glad you're presenting it. This seems to be out of charter scope for this working group. And so, and soon this will be my working group, though it isn't now. And they certainly can't be chartered them before Stephen quits.
So I think that's true, but in the chartering of this, we did discuss extending the charter for specifically these kind of purposes. So that was envisaged during the initial chartering, but it would have to be put in.
Right, and I guess I want to understand the scope of the work before we determine whether a new working group is needed or whether it was in scope for this working group, for some future generation of this working group.
Rich Sauls, yeah, I think this kind of thing is useful. Look at attribute certificates, which don't have a key, but they have a place to put other attributes, like a digest of the thing is. And then the person who signed the attribute is the software publisher.
Yeah.
So that would address the spam issue and also the identity issue.
Yeah.
Phil Baker, Komodo. One of the things that comes to mind is that if you want somebody to run a log, we do actually have some code signing infrastructure. And it is problematic in that it's not just every CA does different things. Every platform that we support for code signing has a different way of doing things and signs different things. In that sometimes you sign the executable, sometimes it's the package that installs, sometimes it's an installer.
Okay.
And I think that probably if we're going to do something, rather than just do the CT transparency thing, I'd rather see a working group look at how to do code signing properly across the board.
Yes.
And the other reason I'd like to do it slightly separately is when people are mentioning attribute certificates, which I'm afraid they give me the screaming heebie-jeebies. I would like to get away from ASN1, as we saw in that other slide. ASN1 really is evil. I'd rather not build yet more CRUD on top of yet more.
Okay, we're going to cut the line after.
Daniel Franca Akamai. Just 2 seconds, a few comments that have been made here. That one, I think this is really valuable work. 2, it is dubiously in scope for this working group. And that 3, there is probably enough work to be done on support infrastructure to make this practical to merit working off another working group.
Okay, I'd actually argue that the question, the mechanics of code signing is totally orthogonal to this. We're talking about arbitrary binary blobs here, and we aren't assuming anything about the internal structure of these blobs. So, the question is, if we've got a blob of data, how do we log it? So
that is actually different from the motivational slide that Frank put in his talk, right? Frank's talk is suggesting that the goal of this is to ensure that you're not running some random version of code that isn't being done, which means that you need something more than just random binary blobs. It implies that you need at least an identifier for a product and a version of a platform or something.
Yeah, but those do not assume anything about the signing mechanism.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, anyway, the main things that we wanted to ask a couple of questions about this. Number one, is there interest in seeing this work go forward in the IETF, even if it doesn't happen here? Hum if yes. Hum if no. Okay, so there's interest in this work. Second question is about the applicability of this draft or the appropriateness of this draft for adoption by somebody. So hum if yes, this is a suitable draft for using as a basis for this work. Okay, hum if it's not a suitable basis for the work. Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you. That helps clarify some stuff. Okay. Is there anything else? I'm afraid we don't have time to go back to Saba's additional discussion, but.
There's a flag here that appears to have no owners. Oh, that's yours.
Okay. All right, thank you, and we'll see you on the mailing list. Well, that was interesting. Blue sheets.